Welcome to NFL Nexus. For years, the story of Andrew Luck's retirement was pretty much a settled, if, tragic chapter in the history of the NFL. But just recently, a wild rumor clawed its way back to the surface, and it painted a really dramatic picture of corporate betrayal. So today, we're going to dive deep into what was said, how the man himself, the legend, finally responded, and what this whole thing tells us about the stories we as fans choose to believe.
And this quote right here, it perfectly captures the heart of this entire saga. I mean, think about it. The shock of Luck's retirement was so massive precisely because it didn't compute. It felt like a glitch in the matrix, right? Guys like him, with that level of talent at that age, they just don't hang it up. And that deep sense of confusion, it left this giant void. And, well, years later, that void was filled by a very, very compelling rumor.
All right, so to really get why this news story caught fire like it did, we have to rewind the clock. We have to go back to the exact moment the original news broke, a moment that sent shockwaves through the entire NFL world and left everyone just completely and utterly stunned.
I want you to really imagine the scene here. It's August, it's a totally meaningless preseason game. The crowd is just there to have a good time, maybe see some rookies. And then, a notification flashes across thousands of phones in the stadium. It pops up on the TV broadcast. Andrew Luck, the guy who was supposed to be the face of the Indianapolis Colts for the next decade, is done at age 29. And as he walked off that field for the very last time, he was booed by fans who were just then realizing that their Super Bowl hopes were literally walking down the tunnel right along with him. It was so abrupt, so confusing, and just absolutely shocking.
For years after that night, this was the story that we all understood and accepted. It was simple, and honestly, it was incredibly sad. You look at this list. It's not just a list of injuries, it's a medical chart from a war zone. His body had become this jigsaw puzzle of brutal, painful setbacks. Torn cartilage, shredded labrums, a lacerated kidney of all things. Each one of those bullet points represents months, and I mean months, of painful rehab of grinding every single day just to get back, only to be followed by another breakdown. The physical toll was obvious, but the mental toll, the constant cycle of pain, surgery, rehab, and then more pain, it had just become too much. It was a depressing reality, but it was the one we all thought was the truth.
But this is the NFL, where drama is never too far away. That accepted tragic narrative, it got challenged years later. A totally new story started bubbling to the surface, one that was way more dramatic, way more salacious, and it painted the Indianapolis Colts as the villains who didn't just lose their star quarterback, but actually pushed him out the door.
And the source of this new firestorm, well, that's what makes it so interesting. It came from a former teammate, the tight end Eric Ebron. Now, as one of the articles we looked at puts it, Ebron is a player who has never met a microphone he didn't like. So, he's a guy who likes to talk. And he went on a podcast with a story to tell. And man, was it a bombshell.
And there it is, the accusation that just spread like wildfire across the internet. According to Eric Ebron, Andrew Luck didn't just walk away because he was physically and mentally exhausted from the pain. No, he was allegedly given a brutal, cold-hearted ultimatum by the team's general manager, Chris Ballard. You're either playing or we're moving on. In this version of the story, Luck wasn't making a choice to leave, he was being forced out. It completely changes the narrative from a tragedy to a betrayal.
Now, this story was powerful. You have to admit it had all the elements of great drama. It had betrayal, it had corporate pressure, it had a clear villain. It was the kind of juicy behind-the-scenes story that's just so easy to believe. There was just one tiny, massive problem with it. The man at the absolute center of the storm says it's just not true.
To really appreciate what happened next, you have to understand something crucial about Andrew Luck. The guy is off the grid. He is basically the NFL's version of Bigfoot. He doesn't do the media circuit, he doesn't have a podcast, he's not tweeting his thoughts every 5 minutes. He is notoriously incredibly private. So for him to be pulled out of his quiet post-football life to comment on an NFL rumor, well, that's a huge deal. It's an incredibly significant event.
And his response came through a veteran local reporter. It was polite, it was direct, and it was utterly definitive. He didn't drag Eric Ebron through the mud, he didn't get nasty, but with two simple, carefully chosen sentences, he completely dismantled the narrative that had been building for days. Wonderful partnership, without merit. Boom, done. He shut the whole thing down.
Let's just put these two stories side by side, because this really clarifies everything. On one side, you've got Ebron's claim, a hostile front office ultimatum that forced a franchise player out. On the other side, you have Luck's own words, his reality. He describes a wonderful partnership and states plainly that any notion of internal pressure is without merit. I mean, these two realities, they just can't coexist. It's not a matter of perspective. One is true and one is not.
So, with the rumors so thoroughly and so publicly debunked by the only person whose opinion actually matters, the question changes completely. It's no longer about what happened to Andrew Luck, it's about why. Why were so many of us, so many fans and media members, so eager to believe the more dramatic, more conspiratorial story in the first place?
Well, first things first, we have to look at the narrator of the story, right? During the very same podcast where he dropped this bombshell, Eric Ebron also made it crystal clear that he has his own personal issues with GM Chris Ballard. He's just not a fan. So when someone who actively dislikes a person tells a story that makes that person look like a monster, you have to take that with a massive, massive grain of salt. It calls the whole motive into question.
But the real reason this rumor gains so much traction goes so much deeper than just one person's grudge. Football fans, all of us, we feel like we were robbed. We were robbed of watching one of the most talented quarterbacks of his generation get to finish his story. We mourn that lost potential, all the Super Bowls that could have been. And psychologically, it is just plain easier to process that kind of loss by pointing a finger at a villain. A conspiracy gives us a target for our frustration, and that can feel way more satisfying than just sitting with a sad, complicated truth.
Because the simple, undramatic truth is often the hardest one to swallow. There was no secret meeting. There was no cold-hearted ultimatum. The reality is that a violent, brutal game took a devastating toll on a good man's body, to the point where he just couldn't do it anymore. That's the whole story. The villain wasn't a person in a suit, it was the game itself.
And this slide right here, this really underscores the final, most important takeaway from all of this. His retirement wasn't a surrender. It was a choice. It was an act of incredible strength. He chose his long-term health, his sanity, and his future, his life after football, over continuing down a path of endless pain and rehab. It's a bittersweet reality, for sure, but as Andrew Luck himself just reminded all of us, it is the only truth that actually matters.
So in the end, Luck's rare public statement puts a definitive cap on this story. The case is closed. But it leaves us with this final thought, a question for all of us. In sports, and maybe in life in general, why are we sometimes so drawn to a complicated lie when a simple, painful truth is sitting right there in front of us? It really seems like our desire for a clean narrative, one with clear heroes and villains, can sometimes be more powerful than reality itself. What did you think? Let me know down in the comments. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to NFL Nexus for more stories from around the league. And hey, before you go, if you're looking for something fun for the kids, grandkids, or even for yourself, check out our coloring books. They're a great way to unwind and support the channel. You can find them using the link in the description or the QR code on your screen now. Thanks for watching.